Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia L. Millender. In 1987, I was an interior designer working for Dayton Hudson at their Eastland store. Whenever I'd introduce myself to someone and say, "My name is Patricia Millender," they would say, "You mean like that building downtown across from the Renaissance Center?" I said, "Yes, it's named after my father." They were always a little bit shocked, but I can understand why they were shocked. You see, at that time, there were schools named for African Americans, there were some streets named for African Americans, and at HBCUs, of course, they had dorms and lecture halls named for their famous alumni. But nowhere in the United States was there a building that contained a 33-floor hotel, a retail space, a parking garage, and an apartment complex with 330 apartments in the heart of any city named for an African American. My grandparents moved here from Mississippi in 1920 as a part of the Great Migration. My father graduated from Northwestern High School, where he said he made a real big mistake. You see, he had been offered a college scholarship, but he turned that down. Instead, he followed his father and his older brothers into the Ford factory to work. He was a young man. He wanted some money. He wanted a nice car. He wanted wonderful clothes, especially ties. And he wanted to be able to go to Chicago when he wanted to. And he especially wanted to go to the Great Stone Ballroom. It was at the Great Stone Ballroom that he met my mother. She would tell us that he told her after several dates, "Girl, I'll marry you if you can make me a chocolate cake." For the next 2 years, every week, she made him a chocolate cake or something else chocolate. A man of his word, they got married. 4 days later, Pearl Harbor was bombed. He, of course, enlisted in the military, where he rose to the rank of warrant officer. About 30 years ago, my sister and my mom and I were cleaning out my father's study that was in their basement of their home. We found a journal that my father had kept during the war. In it, he noted that because the military was segregated, all the colored officers had to stay together. And the Army had put them up in this really fabulous hotel in Italy where they were stationed. He would write that the people there treated us with more dignity and respect than we ever received at home. That was a terrible situation. The soldiers would sit around talking about the cities they had come from, the restaurants in those cities, the clubs in those cities, and of course their wives and girlfriends. But they also talked about what they were going to do when this war ended. When they went home, how were they going to contribute to the life and success of their friends, their families, and the community at large. When the war ended, my father returned home to Detroit, but he was a different person. The first thing he did was to quit his job at Ford Motor Company. He went to work at the post office so he could go to night school. It took him a while, but he graduated from the Detroit College of Law, magna cum laude. He was also the first colored boy to be elected to an office for the graduating class. Yeah, he was all that. My dad loved to barbecue. I can close my eyes right now and see him in the backyard, standing in the shade of the garage with his khaki pants on, a real fresh crease, thanks to my mom, and his bandline shirt. His grill was a gray big tin tub covered with chicken wire, propped up by 4 orange bricks. In one hand, he would have his shaker bottle with water and vinegar and those special spices that made his ribs extra special good. In the other hand, he always had a book, usually science fiction. Now, my father and my mother also at Christmas time gave a brunch for their friends who didn't have any children. My mother would cook fried chicken and grits, scrambled eggs, and her special homemade cinnamon rolls. Today, my sister and I continue that tradition. Now, she hosts and I cook for about 50 people. Now, the menu is much more extensive. It now includes bacon and sausage and ham and my personal favorite, salmon. But the morning of Christmas Eve, I get up early in the morning and I work from about 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, making 150 of those homemade cinnamon rolls using my mother's special recipe. Everybody looks forward to that, including some of the people here in this audience. My father always stressed education, education, education. We always did our homework sitting around the dining room table. This was also the place where he would work on his cases. When I was graduating from 6th grade, I had to learn a poem entitled A Boob in Atoms. Of course, my father was right there diligently helping me learn that poem. It was the poem about a man who was awakened from his sleep by an angel writing in a book. He asked the angel, "What are you writing?" And he said, "Well, the names of those who love the Lord." Abu said, "Well, is my name one?" And he said, No, it's not. Abu said to the angel, "Then write me as one who loves his fellow man." The angel wrote and vanished. The next night, he arrived there with a golden book and showed Abu the names whom love of God had blessed. Ben Adam's name led all the rest. Now, all these stories that I told you, while they were very interesting, they wouldn't make anybody name a building after my dad. But you see, he was an attorney by profession, a member of the first racially integrated law firm in the state of Michigan, possibly in the country. His law firm sent attorneys down to Mississippi to aid in the release of the Freedom Riders. But he was a political activist by passion. Now, he ran a lot of campaigns that he lost, but when the census allowed Detroit to get a second congressional seat, he ran John Conyers for Congress. Well, you all know the result of that. Of course, he won. After that, he started winning a lot of elections. The Detroit Free Press started referring to him as the kingmaker, the quiet, behind-the-scenes man who was the real force behind Black Detroit politics. Then his next big campaign was with Coleman Young for mayor of the city of Detroit. Now, he and Coleman had met in Italy because Coleman had been a Tuskegee Airman and was stationed where he was in Italy. Several weeks into the campaign, my dad came home angry. In fact, he was angry for several days. That was just not like him to be angry. I said to my mom, "What's the matter with Daddy?" She said, "Oh, he'll tell you when he's ready for you to know." Well, it seems that when my father left Coleman's campaign headquarters, His car was covered with bumper stickers and Coleman Young's placards. And about a block from our downtown condo, he was pulled over by 2 white Detroit police officers. They demanded that he get out of the car, and they called him boy. Of course, he was indignant. He later told us, "Come on, I want to tell you guys what's happening." And he told us that story. And he said to us, "This is the reason why I run these campaigns. You need to understand that this is no way to treat any human being." He said, "That's why full integration of the Detroit police force is going to be a cornerstone of the Young administration if he gets elected." Well, of course, you know he was elected. After that campaign, my father decided maybe it was time for semi-retirement. He bought a home in St. Croix, and he took my daughter, Keisha, and my brother's son, Robbie, down to St. Croix on every school vacation they could get. And the kids had a great time down there. But then he became ill, and he needed to have surgery. My sister's father-in-law was a cardiothoracic surgeon. Now, a lot of my dad's friends tried to get him to go to Mayo Clinic to have this surgery. My dad wasn't having any of that. So Penny's father-in-law said, as a professional courtesy to my dad, because they had become really close friends, that he would scrub with the surgical team. And that's what he did. The day before his surgery, Keisha and I went to my parents' house. You see, I had a book that I had just finished reading, and I knew my dad would love to read this in recovery. So we went to the house, and my parents were not particularly affectionate people, but something had told me that I needed to make sure I gave him a kiss goodbye. So I said to him, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to give you a kiss." He said, "No, you're not." And he started weaving back and forth. He even started running around that dining room table. Well, Keisha and I were in hot pursuit. And of course, you know we caught him, and we covered his face with kisses. We left that night. When we left, we were still laughing. Next day, when I got off from work, I went to the hospital to check on my father. My mother said, "Well, he's still in recovery," so I went home so I could pick up Keisha. That night, my brother called me and told me my father had suffered a heart attack. But he was okay. So next day after work, I went down to the hospital, and my mother did not look good. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Well, your father's not awake yet." I said, "Wait, that's not possible." And then I got physically ill because, you see, the book that I had brought for my father to read was entitled Coma. He would languish for several months. But at the beginning of that time, my mom and I stood at his bedside, watching all the monitors, and really silently weeping. And I leaned over and I said, "Daddy, Daddy, wake up. Keisha and Robbie want to go to St. Croix." The EEG machine beeped, 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 and then it went perfectly straight. And the neurologist, of course, had told us that he was brain dead and that he would not recover. However, Regina, my sister's father-in-law, because he had scrubbed with the surgical team, he was the first one to arrive in the recovery room when the code blue was sounded. Unbeknownst to us, he had gone to my dad's law partners to tell them that my father had in fact been connected to a non-functioning respirator. And then, on top of that, the alarms that would have let the staff know that the respirator was not working, they had been turned off. Well, you can imagine what happened. Like I said, he would languish for several months, and my mom would be at that hospital every day from the beginning of the visiting hours until the end of the visiting hours. She would be consoled by judges and lawyers and council people and state reps and state senators and all of their friends from the unions, and of course their friends from the TULC. John Conyers would fly in to see my dad, and of course, Coleman Young was there. At his funeral, Coleman Young would announce that the next major development in Detroit would be named for his friend, Bob Millender. Now, my father's office was on the 32nd floor of the Cadillac Square building, and he had a corner office. He could look out of his window, and he could see the corner of East Jefferson in Randolph. That's where Coleman Young decided to build this building in tribute to my father. At the opening of the Millender Center, a reporter came to me and said, "What do you think your dad would think about this building?" I said, "Well, he probably liked the building a lot. It, after all, was a pretty beautiful building. But I think he would be confused and not understand why anybody would name a building like this after him. You see, he never asked for anything for himself. No judgeship, no money, no clients. In fact, he would often take his own money and thousands of dollars and give it to causes and candidates that he supported." Now, we all thought, this building is named for my father because he got people elected. But while working on this story to tell you, I learned a lot of things about my father. And now I think it wasn't about that, but in fact, it was about a promise made by a soldier in a foreign land a long time ago. You see, he was determined to live his life and exist as someone who truly loved his fellow man. Thank you.
Patricia Millender, ladies and gentlemen.